So we established this split plot design. So these plots were set up. So in each plot, we put some 14 plants, three different varieties. You can see here, Florida 127, Brilliance, and Medallion. So these three different strawberry varieties we used, and we set up them in the uh, ground. You see these white color plots, they are where the water is set on all the time. Green color plots where water is on for 10 minutes, off for 10 minutes. Yellow color means 10 minutes on, 15 minutes off, and orange color means 10 minutes on and 20 minutes off. So now we have four irrigation programs. We have three strawberry cultivars, and the data we collected was picking up the strawberries by hand twice a week during the two seasons, 2021-22 to 22-23, and then also collecting the UAV-based images or overhead images to monitor the growth of the plants over the season. And then we also checked the quality, whether it affects the sweetness of the plant, of the fruits, strawberry fruits or not. And then, of course, the agronomic water use efficiency, where we see how much yield we have, let's say, in a hectare, and then how much water we used in that hectare. So that will give us agronomic water efficiency, and then applied some statistical tests to look at the statistical significance of the results. So first thing here, so this is season one, season two. So if you see the letters are same, that means there was no difference, statistically significant difference between these different irrigation programs. And you can see here, first season, it's canopy projected area. That is the overhead images that we collected, and we, you know, used it and used the images to quantify how much canopy the plants have over a period of time, first month, second month, third month, fourth month, during the fourth month of the strawberry season. And we see in the second season, there was increase in canopy area. So you would imagine when the water is set off, so the plants would not perform well in that time. But we see here plants do perform well when we set the water off. So it's kind of surprising and counterintuitive, because we would imagine when the water is always on, plants will be happy and they will grow nice. But then when we set the water off, plants will get stressed, which they get, but then it has some positive benefits, which we will talk in the next slides. And we saw, okay, so now looking at the yield, you can see here the yield also increased with the intermittent irrigation program. Intermittent irrigation program is the off, when we introduce the off cycles, when we set the water off for certain times. You see there was increase in yield in one of the months, and that showed up in the total yield for season one. So that means when water is always on, there is less yield canopy area, no negative effect on the fruit quality with these intermittent irrigation programs. But there was surprisingly increase in yield in one of the varieties, and we were able to save lots of water. Water use efficiency was pretty high all the time. And then the important thing in this thing to look is that this plot, so we see that if you look at the correlation, simple correlation with the uh, yield with the canopy area, you see there is pretty significant. P is very less than 0.001. So we had significant relationship between the yield and canopy area, which means that as the canopy area is increasing, it is also increasing the yield. And then, so what we discussed so far is that we can save lots of water without any negative effect on the crop, and we can save lots of water, and we may have an increase, surprisingly increase in yield in some of the varieties. And this is good for growers, because farmers, like, they can save water. They are usually afraid to off the water, but now they can off the water and they can have good quality fruit also at the same time. Then this is of course sustainable because you can save lots of water, no effect on the fruit quality, and you have increase in yield in certain varieties. Now we saw increase in one of the cultivars of the strawberry, and we wanted to see why did we see that increase in yield when we are setting the water off. Like it's counterintuitive. We usually imagine the it should decrease the yield, but it increased the yield. Now, in this case, we used these different irrigation programs and we wanted to evaluate just uh, that one cultivar or one strawberry type which had increase in yield. That's why in this design here, you see we have collected data only from that cultivar. And now the data we collected were the UAV-based images and ground-based images. And then we looked at the senescence. Senescence is like when the leaves turn from green. Generally, naturally, all the leaves turn from green to yellow to brown, and they die as the cycle progresses. So we took images on third day, sixth day, ninth day during those first 2 weeks, and we monitored how the leaves are dying or senescing, turning yellow, yellow to brown. And we also looked at how much wet area we have on this plastic mulch. So this is the plastic mulch under which there is soil. So we also looked at the temperature of this plastic mulch, and we also looked at the leaf temperature using ground-based thermal camera and UAV-based thermal camera. And of course, the canopy growth also using UAV-based RGB cameras. And then what we did is, so I did not include yellow. I did not look at yellow because it's the transition phase and it's hard to visually sometimes you may miss it and you can maybe bias the results. So I only looked at the brown portion. So if this is the brown portion, so I consider it in these three leaves, so it will be a level one. That means 0 to 20% area on the leaf is browning. So as the level increases, that means the browning increases, and by the end level five, the entire more than 80% of the leaf would have browned or senesced or died. And what I saw is, so why did this thing happen is increase in yield happened because if you remember the first image that I saw of the strawberry, so strawberry comes with desiccated roots, but it has 3 to 5 leaves still on top of it. So when we plant it, those leaves are old, so they will start senescing. So we see when we off the sprinkler irrigation for some time, that imposes heat stress, which we will see in the later slide. So what that does is you see the senescence already starting on the third day here. So it was already higher for the intermittent irrigation compared to the control. So control was still green, but the leaves in the other irrigation programs were already senescing. Okay, so what it did is when we off the irrigation program, as you can imagine, is for example, 10 minutes of image is here. As you can look at the plastic mulch here, there is still some water. Then at 15 minutes off, there is some water, but most of the area or bed is dried. But by the 20 minutes off, there is almost no water on by the end of the off cycle. So off cycle, we collected the images at the beginning when we off the sprinkler irrigation. Then when the sprinkler irrigation cycle, when the next cycle starts, before that we go again and collect the images. So this is at the end of the off cycle. So this is the control here where the water is always on. You see there is more blue area. As the off time increases, off cycle increases, 10 minutes off, you have blue area, but it has decreased substantially compared to control. 15 minutes off, very little blue area, and 20 minutes off, almost no blue area. So this temperature increases on the plastic mulch, also on the leaf also. Now we understand that temperature is increasing. That means there is heat stress on the plant. That's what is causing the senescence of the leaves. Now, in this slide, we can look at, for example, this. We can see as the wet area is increasing, as the wet area is decreasing, the senescence is increasing here. Similarly, as the leaf temperature is increasing, the senescence, the browning of the leaves is also increasing. And then we look at the canopy area, let's say by the end of the first month, and we look at the senescence by the end of second week, they also have a strong relationship here. So, which makes us now, which explains the physiological mechanism behind this increase in the yield that we saw. So that increase in yield is because we impose the heat stress on the plants. These old leaves that are already on the plant, they senesce, they die faster. So this is important to understand here. When they senesce faster, so the mechanism in the plants is that when the leaves senesce faster, they translocate. They send the nutrients, whatever is left in the leaf, back to the plant. For example, this is strawberry plant. You see these dead leaves here or these yellowing leaves. So this leaf is dying. It will be sending back the leftover nutrients back to the plant. So for example, in this case, that portion where the source of the stress, that means this rate of translocation is faster. When the rate of translocation is faster, so plants have now more nutrients available to grow more leaves and more flowers, and that's why we see at the end of the period there is more yield also. So that is the explanation why we saw increase in yield even when we impose the heat stress. But this stress has to be moderate. That means, let's say, if I had used 30 minutes off cycle, the plants may not have survived because the stress would have been more. It would not have been beneficial then. It would have been detrimental to the plant and plants would have died. So this is a win-win situation for growers because now we have the scientific basis for them to tell them that, you can off the water. You do not need to keep the sprinklers on the whole day. You can off them on certain time and you can save water. You can save energy costs, electricity costs, and you will also see maybe increase in certain varieties. And there is a guarantee of no negative, effect on the yield or quality. Now, bam, that was the portion where we conserved the water, but we did not just simply look at whether we were able to save water, but we also looked at, what are the mechanisms that affect the plant, whether there is increase in yield, decrease in yield. So we try to explain all those physiological mechanisms behind it. Then coming to the second challenge facing Florida is soil subsidence. So South Florida, there is soil subsidence happening. I will talk about that study area more in later slides. But first, we wanted to look how much, monitor the soil subsidence in that study area. Now, the thing first stop for us was let's look at the LiDAR data because LiDAR is the data, pretty high resolution data we can have, and we can look at the soil subsidence that is happening. Now, a brief about LiDAR is that LiDAR is we use from the electromagnetic spectrum, it is the infrared portion we use. So light has particle nature and wave nature. And here we exploit the particle nature of light and we take that one small particular wavelength, 1064 nanometers, for example, that comes in the infrared region. It's that particular single wavelength that we use. And since this is an active system, we throw the light, these packets of light towards the ground, let's say at time t, and then we receive it back at time t2. Now we know what time we sent it, what time we received it back, so we can know the distance between this sensor and the reflected point where the reflection or the backscatter came back. So that helps us to look at the elevation. That's why we can get highly, accurate dams with LiDAR data because you can look at the elevation. So since we have GPS antennas on board, we have IMUs, inertial measurement units. As you can see in the photogrammetry courses, those roll, pitch, yaw, while the airplane flies, it moves. So those movements are kind of stored by this instrument here, so we are able to tell the points which we send to the ground, its location in latitude longitude, meaning xy, and also the elevation, the z. So that z value is important. Mostly that's what we use lidar data for. Now we need so on the bare earth there will be the elevation will be pretty accurate, the ground elevation, or the if you generate DEMs from these points, it will be pretty accurate because you can send millions of points or hundreds of points. But then when it comes to now vegetation, so this accuracy reduces. Okay, first thing is, let's say I sent uh, okay, this pen I will use here. Let's say this is an aircraft here, and I sent a, it's the laser is usually straight. It's not, this wobbly, but so this is the laser beam. It would have some, beam width. And then when we sent it down, let's say it's a vegetated area. So it hits the branch. This is a sugarcane plant. That's what I was working on. So it hits the first leaf of the sugarcane. That's why you call first return from this single pulse. Then some of the pulse penetrates further because let's say there is gap, and then second return comes from here. So from this beam, you can have 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 returns, depending upon how much dense the crop is. And the last return, we call it as ground. So first return, we imagine it will be top of the canopy. Second return will be somewhere in the middle of the canopy, and the last return will be coming from the ground. Now, having remembered that, we see in the vegetation, so this last return, which we call as ground, may not be true ground because, it may be hitting this stalk here, the bottom portion here, and it's coming back from here. So we will be thinking that this is the ground, but it's actually the bottom of the sugar cane. So that you can imagine, that's why in vegetation areas, we always have some positive bias into the ground elevation. So what we did is we went on and did the study, the surveying, very old good surveying to get the accurate true ground elevation. So we did this RTK surveying and we now have the true ground elevation with us. And then, as you can see, let me go back to laser. Okay, so now this is like so since we are sending points, we receive back the points, so we get a point cloud. It's not necessarily an image that we see normally in multispectral data or RGB data. So these are usually points. Then this is a plot there in that study area. So you see this is sugarcane plot, and good thing about this is that this part of this plot is bare, and part of this plot is covered by sugarcane here. So this is sugarcane here. This is mostly bare ground. There is some little grass on it, but this is tall. The sugarcane is around, 5 to 6 feet tall here, let's say. So you can see that in the point cloud also. As we are on the bare ground, the ground is here. But as we move into the vegetation, you can see this ground is getting shifted up. So obviously the ground is plain. This is Florida. There is not much relief or undulation on the ground. It's usually plain ground. But this increase in elevation that we saw is not real. It is because of the vegetation that is existing there. This is airborne LiDAR, data collected from airborne LiDAR. So it has around 8 points per square meter density. And this is UAV, it's huge. So it had, I think, around 800 or 900 points per square meter. So density is huge. That's why you see this canopy pretty clear here. So this is top of the canopy and this is ground. And you can see here as we go from bare ground, I mentioned there was some small grass. You can see that small grass here. As we moved from the ground, bare ground into the sugarcane vegetation, you see the ground shifting up. So this is the evidence that yes, there is a positive elevation bias under the vegetation. So the DEMs in the agriculture fields will always be biased by such few centimeters. Now, I have this airborne LiDAR data and UAV LiDAR data, and I calculate some metrics from it, structural metrics, looking at the, height of these plants, looking at the minimum of the points, maximum of the points, average of the points. You can see in this column, let's say, and then I use some machine learning, algorithms. For example, in this, we used ensemble, random forest, and extra trees. So, I think in brief, I can mention here is that so the good thing about random forest and extra trees is they are kind of similar, and some decision trees. But the thing is that in random forest, what happens is that you when you give it the data, you keep one test sample and you give it some data for training, and in that training data, it splits that training data into further decision trees. But then extra trees, it uses the entire training data set. So there is more randomization in extra trees. This is pretty, uh, it picks up within the training set, it picks up the parts of the training data. Let's say in the first, let's say I had 70 points. So let's say I kept 20 points for testing and I used 50 for training. Within those 50 points, random forest will pick, let's say, 30 in the first tree, and another tree, it will use another 30 points, and another tree, it will use another 30 points. So let's say if I had 100 trees, so this data will get swapped. But extra trees will not do that. It will use entire data set. So there is more randomization in it. Now I have calculated some metrics from the LiDAR data. So I want to see which of the metrics will explain the data more. So that is done by this recursive feature elimination. So you start with many features that you can calculate from this LiDAR data, and you give it to the model, and it tests it, ranks these metrics that you give, and finally you end up with 4 or 5 metrics that explain the model well. And this is a busy slide. So study area was, as I earlier showed, south of Lake Okeechobee, and then it is sugarcane dominant. So sugarcanes are there, and we collected almost 70 to 75 GPS points or RTK surveyed points, especially with the Z value elevation. And you can see the spread here in the sugarcane fields. And then within those RTK points, we took certain area, let's say certain buffer, and we calculated some metrics from the LiDAR data, the Z minimum, the Z maximum, P gap, and many other metrics. And then we use those metrics into this machine learning model, and then we had the true elevation with us from the RTK. So we using this metrics, we try to predict the ground now. So we know this is vegetation is done on top of it that is biasing it. We use these vegetation metrics and we try to improve the model. So if you use usually in the LiDAR, when you get the LiDAR data, if it is classified or you want to classify it, we usually do is we use the Z minimum, the lowest return or the lowest certain percentile, 1 percentile, 2 percentile, 5 percentile, and we call it as ground. So that's what we did here. And when we compared it with the RTK based elevation, so R square was small, but RMSE was around 10 centimeters. For airborne, it was around 9.4. For UAV, it was 10. And when we use these metrics and put them in the model, you see the RMSE keeps increasing. Sorry, RMSE was substantially reduced. So we have less error. Here we have, let's say, 10 centimeter or 9 centimeter error. in the vertical domain, and we reduce it to 4, and UAV has 6. Now, the thing here to see is that UAV data, we would expect that it would perform well because it had 800 points per square meter. When you have 800 points per square meter, you have more chance to get the returns from the ground. And here we had just 8 to 9 points per square meter. That means there is less chance to get the returns from the ground, and because the vegetation density is thick, vegetation is dense. But you see here this performing better than UAV, and that is a catch here. This is just looking at the RMSE in the plot form here. So you see the RMSE improve for both of this airborne and UAV. Now, the thing to understand from here is that the traditional sense of when we use the LiDAR data under vegetation and using the Z minimum or the last return or the last 10 percentile is not sufficient because we saw there is a positive bias, especially if it's a dense vegetation. Then what we do is we use these structural metrics. We calculate these different metrics from the top of the vegetation and we put them in a model, and we are able to improve the model, and we are able to reduce the RMSE. So this is a better model. Now, why did airborne perform well than UAV is that, so I told that there will be, when we send the beam, there will be multiple returns, from top, from second, from third layer, and from fourth layer. The thing with airborne LiDAR is it's sophisticated in this way that the sensor had capability to store these up to 6 returns. So if the beam is going and it is getting, let's say, 6 points back or 7 points back, the sensor was able to record 6 returns. But in UAV, although we had umpteenth number of points, but the sensor was only able to record 3 returns. And why is that? Because you can imagine we are sending a lot of points, so then we have a trade-off to do. How many we can't, let's say we cannot store all the 6 or 7 returns, because then it will be billions of points. It already was billions of points in this study area, in this small study area for UAV. But since UAV sensor had only capacity to record 3 returns, so it was most likely getting the last return from the middle part of the canopy or the root of the canopy. Whereas the airborne data, although it had less point density, but whatever points it was shooting, it was able to record up to 6 returns. So when you have 6 returns, there is a higher chance that you will get more returns from the ground. That means the higher point density may not always be the solution, the other designs. And of course, then there is the scan angle. UAV had a broader scan angle, airborne had a narrower scan angle. So because UAV had a broader scan angle, there was more chance that the points were hitting the side of the plant than the ground directly. Okay, so we understand here that using these structural metrics in and the lower return and using some kind of a machine learning model will help us improve the ground. That means our dams, the LiDAR dams in vegetation will be more accurate using this approach. Now, okay. Now the last part was, well, I said we wanted to look at the soil subsidence, and we went with the LiDAR. We were able to improve the LiDAR, but still we had a RMSE of 3 to 4 centimeters. But the soil subsidence in the region is, at centimeter level. So that means we are still in the error margin. That means although we improved LiDAR, but it is still not useful for this situation. So we then use radar data. So now I will go into the study area here. You can see this pole, it's the subsidence post or subsidence post. Let's say 1920s, ground was here at the top of this pole. Today, the ground is here. So during this time, this much subsidence has happened. But remember, this is not land subsidence, this is soil subsidence. And what does that mean? So this is the images of the same pole from different time periods. That means so in 1850s there was a federal law. So these wetlands or the swamps they call them here, they had it was a federal land. So then the central government gave these lands to the state governments on one condition, that you can take these wetlands, you drain them, take the water out of them and use them for agriculture. So same happened with this study area. They drained the wetland. Now when you drain the wetland, you will imagine the soil under it is very rich and it's very good for agriculture. But the problem is, as this soil gets exposed to the atmosphere, the microbes break down this soil and it releases carbon from the soil. So microbial breakdown causes this soil subsidence. So this is more influence is from the natural processes rather than some human intervention. Of course, the reason for subsidence is because we drained the water, but the process of subsidence is through microbial breakdown of the soil. And then, well, we used radar because especially INSAR, because it had millimeter to centimeter level accuracy. So we could not get that with LiDAR, so we shifted to radar now. So radar, as you would know, is it can penetrate through certain, it can penetrate through some clouds and uh, vegetation and smoke. And now this in this electromagnetic spectrum, if you would see, this is where the microwave spectrum is. And as you are going away from visible region here, the wavelength is increasing. That means waves are getting bigger. So we use C-band, which is freely available data, Sentinel-1. It has around 5.6 centimeter wavelength. So if you use X band, you can see here it's able to penetrate top of canopy. If you go to C band, it's able to penetrate deeper into canopy. But if you have L band, you are able to penetrate pretty deep up to the trunk or even the ground under the vegetation. So same is happening with the soil here. With this in mind, we use now. I said light has a wave nature and a particle nature. So in this case, we are exploiting that wave nature of the light. So when you download the SAR image, you would have an amplitude image and you would have this is the amplitude image and this is the phase image. So you see this wave here. So, so from this normal to the peak of the wave, this is what is amplitude, and phase is at particular time where this wave is located. That is the phase. Now we are using phase information. So since this is again an active system, we know when we are sending the wave and when we are receiving it back. So if that phase changes, you see here, let's say at time t1, I am just focusing on the phase now. So I send the wave to the ground, and then at time t2, the satellite comes back and looks at the same place. And if the ground has shifted, this wave will be added. There will be change in the phase because it will add or get reduced. Based on that, we would be able to say there has been some change on the ground. Now, when we combine these two images from time t1 and t2, we use the complex conjugate of each other, we get an interferogram, which looks like this. This is one of my previous studies on a glacier. So now you see these fringes here. So this is where there has been change in this phase. So that means the ground moved from these. Uh, Let me use the laser here again. So the ground moved between these two times. That's why we see these fringes. That means there has been some movement, either away from the satellite or towards the satellite. But then this phase component has components from the topography of the Earth and atmosphere of the Earth and some sort of noise, which we have to remove in the processing when we do the processing. Now I showed you two images. Now imagine if we combine on a time series multiple images, maybe hundreds of images together. That is when we use this SBOS INSAR small baseline subset. There are two types, PS INSAR and SBOS INSAR. So in the SBOS INSAR, what we do is we collect the images close in time. That means Sentinel has, let's say, 12 days time temporal resolution, 12 days apart, and the satellites at the orbit are also not so far, are also closer. So temporal and spatial baseline are closer. So we have that way improved coherence. Coherence is, let's say here, if you see in this image, this is the study area. So you see these bright spots, that is high coherence areas because these are urban areas. And these darker spots, they are vegetation. So vegetation moves on the ground between the two images. That's why you lose this coherence. That means that there is some change because of this. Now, if the change is because of the movement of the vegetation, then we can't show the soil subsidence. So we need the signal to penetrate into the vegetation onto the ground. Then we can take the ground. So now if the coherence is less, this data is not useful. As you can see in the later slides, I use Sentinel data in this region and I checked just two different areas. This is the organic soils and this is normal area where the land subsidence is happening because of maybe groundwater extraction or some other reasons. And I don't have much time. I don't want to take all of your time. So this is the workflow. This is pretty open source. If in the MintPy, for example, you can use those open source Jupyter notebooks. You can process the data. I mean, now you don't have to generate interferograms yourself. You can just go on the ASF website and get those unwrapped interferograms, and then you can do rest of the process in the simple Jupyter notebook and do these corrections that I was saying, removing the atmospheric effect, removing the underlying tropospheric effect. Then you can get the change on the ground, the displacement. And then we were able to see you will be like, this is a lot of displays, subsidence here, minus 1.92 in the organic soils and normal soils, normal area. It's minus 5.5, 5.32. So that's huge, but that is not the case because it's just few places. So if you go deep into it, you are seeing almost this, what you were seeing, minus 1.9 number there. It's just few pixels in a agriculture field, and it was a type of agriculture, it was a type of crop um, where we expect to have the more subsidence. And then this, where you saw the huge number, it was on the side of a lake that has kind of water has gone down. So this could be the changes in the water level itself, or also the ground going down. Then we have to validate our data with some, you know, this is from INSAR, but we have to validate it with the GNSS also. So there were two GNSS stations in the two study areas. The one which shows us higher subsidence, it also that GPS GNSS station there that was monitoring the location for 24 hours every day. It showed that this was around. It also showed around 2.3 to 3.5 centimeter per year subsidence, whereas the other one, organic soil, showed relatively less subsidence. Okay, so, and this kind of was validated with the previous studies that have shown the similar kinds of subsidence in the area with other numerical models and all. So that means this approach will help us to, do monitor the slow subsidence that happens, in the regions for agriculture regions or other places. And so broader impact of this study was we were able to save water in strawberry production using imposing moderate citrus stress, and then we monitor that with different remote sensing images, thermal images, RGB images. We were able to use LiDAR to improve the ground elevation estimation under dense vegetation. We were able to use time series INSAR to monitor the subsidence patterns. That is all. So these are some of the, you know, Like for the first study, water conservation, we had to prove that to the growers. So we had to establish these plots at some grower location also to kind of tell them what we are saying is not just on theory, it is practically happening on the ground. And then, yeah, then this was the field data collection in the sugarcane area using UAV drone and using the aircraft to LiDAR. And you can see, how high the vegetation here can go in the sugarcane. So first chapter is published. This the water conservation part, the senescence part is coming. LiDAR part is still in preparation. And first study was kind of picked up by many news agencies here locally because it was you were saving water and then you were increasing yield also. So farmers were really interested in it. And yeah, that is all. Uh, this is thanks to the people who helped me in the horticulture lab and in the geomatics lab. And some of you may not know this guy. He is Dr. Benjamin Wilkinson. He's the one who has written that photogrammetry book. I don't know if we study that, but in video we were pretty much studying that all the time. The Wolf book on photogrammetry. He's one of the authors, so he was on my committee here from University of Florida. I imagine your eyes will be opened, and now my eyes will be like this. And please ask if you have questions. Thank you.